friends. Welcome back to the Be the Bigger Person podcast. I'm Melissa, your faith-filled friend and grieving daughter who waited until my 30s for love. And through all of this and then some, has learned a lot about growing in the Lord and in myself. From grief to singleness to marriage to friendships and all the faith in between. Let's have the honest and vulnerable conversations that you've been looking for. And before we jump in, just if something during this episode sticks out to you or makes you go, ooh, yes, maybe take a screenshot of the episode and share it on social media with your people and tag at Be the Bigger Person Pod. Today on the episode, as you can see, I'm not alone. I have a person here. I have someone who is one of my favorite people, my now husband. You've been on the pod as my boyfriend. I think you've been also on the pod as my fiance, and now you are on the pod as my husband. Guys, if you have not met him on the pod yet, you should. We have an episode where we told our whole love story, and then we have an episode where I just asked him a bunch of questions. But if you have not met him yet, this is Ivan, my husband. And I'm very excited that you're here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me back.
You're welcome. I basically had to ask him. I couldn't just tell him, which I respect. I respect that I couldn't just be like, hey, babe, you're going to be on the pod. Anyways, we're going to go through basically everything that we're going to basically have like a newlywed chat. We're going to kind of talk through all the things that we've learned thus far in marriage. We're going to talk about the good, the messy, the we did not expect that. We're going to go through all of it. So I also, if you are not following me over on Instagram at Be the Bigger Person Pod, the other day I put a question box where I basically said, what questions should I ask Ivan? And boy, did you guys deliver. Honestly, I have told Ivan a couple of them. I've not told him all of them because I want some of them just to be like off the cuff. But I also have a couple questions myself. We're very excited.
Let's jump in.
Let's do it. Okay, here we go. Let's start with, what have you found to be the hardest part of like this big life change of being married?
That's a great question. I think there's a couple of things, and they're related to each other, I guess. And that is, I've been living on my own since university, if I'm being honest. And I've lived by myself predominantly for the last, prior to getting married, something like 6 years, right? So I think learning to live with somebody else again is, I think, one aspect of that. And I think the other thing is kind of almost a feeling of lost autonomy to a certain extent. So I think that has created a large challenge, although it's not negative in the sense that, of course, I want to be around you all the time and I love living with you. So that's a massive plus. But I think there's also this thing of, you realize that you don't have quite as many moments where you're alone or alone with your thoughts. And so I think we're both had to navigate that and figure out how to create those times. I think the other thing that I could have never anticipated was how long things take. So,
Tell me more.
Well, people are so kind to say, don't really commit too much when, shortly after getting married, take that time to be married. And I didn't understand why people said that. And now I've come to the realization it's because everything is a conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Because when you live by yourself, you don't need to justify why you do something a certain way, or maybe even justify your preferences and why you might want something done differently than your spouse wants to do it. And so everything is a conversation and not a short conversation, right? And so things take a lot more time early on, which I think there's nothing wrong with that.
You're learning like how the other person lives, how you live, how you merge that together.
But it's not a negative thing. It's just different. And it's unique to the season.
Yes, correct. Because I think what we've discussed is like, the more that we're married, the longer that we're married, it will be like, oh, okay, yeah, you do this, I do this. That's what we're used to. We're like, oh, we've already created rhythms of like doing that together, like whatever. Whereas now it's like, we're literally, everything is new.
Yes. And then I think there's a lot of soul searching early days of marriage in that, yet again, there are all these things, whether it's your preferences and you've never had to justify why you prefer something a certain way, or it's, things you don't like that you didn't realize you didn't like, and you've never had to communicate that before, right? I think
Yeah.
we've both had to deal with that to a
Yeah.
certain extent. So, yeah, I think that's probably the single biggest thing.
I would agree. I would agree. I think, and this is something that I would love to hear your thoughts on as well. I think I've learned more about myself than I expected within marriage, because a lot of it is like having to talk about things and figure out why you do things the way you do, and why there are things that really matter to you in the way that they do, that you've maybe never had to, like, I'm saying you, I don't mean like you pointed, you is a general term, but like that maybe you've never had to like verbally think about and explain. I was going to say explain and express, and I just put them together. And then you have to be like, oh, and also like holding them like, okay, what actually matters to me to like continue on in, versus what's just sort of the way I've done things, and what am I willing to like change a little bit.
Yeah, and I think there's also some nuanced things that are very interesting in that when you have a preference or a desire, I don't think you're always asking yourself the question, what is it that actually matters to me within this thing? But when you collaborate with someone on something that you're going to do going forward, you actually have to kind of drill down to what is the thing that actually matters to me. It's not the whole of it. It's probably one or two pieces of it that really matter. And then when you're kind of doing a collaborative output, then it's how do you capture all the things that matter to both of us? But you often don't have to think of it in terms of what are the things that actually matter to me.
Yeah.
Whereas when you collaborate, so I think that's been an interesting thing. Like we had that conversation recently, and it was a lot of, okay, well, what about this actually matters to me? Why do you have such a strong feeling about this? And I had to do the same, especially when we thought differently.
Yeah.
And then so that we could come up with an outcome that was functional for both of us.
Yeah. And I think the fact that I think we both learned, I think we've known this obviously beforehand, but we've seen it more in action. Just because you have a strong feeling that's different than somebody else doesn't mean it's like just going to be an automatic, like you disagree and there's no resolution.
That's right.
There's like a way to get to, like you say, get to the core of it, and then figure out like, okay, why do I feel this way, getting to the core of it, and also like how can we incorporate the things that matter to both of us.
That's right.
Going forward. Okay, here's a sort of going along with that, and then we are going to also we had a lot of questions about intimacy and sex, and that like the physical portion of a relationship come through, so we are going to get to a lot of those because we're very honest. And so we're not going to be like, oh, we're not going to talk about any of those. No, we're going to talk about them. And so anyways, just wanted to give you a little teaser. But going back to the point of like, getting on the same page with things and all of that, what have you learned, or how have you learned to respond when the other person is upset or having a bad day or feeling extra emotional? Which your wife never gets emotional, ever.
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's an interesting thing, right? Because it's easy to, especially if you are, and we've talked about this a lot, is that I lead with thinking and you lead with feeling.
Yes.
And so I think as a thinker, it's very easy to devalue the feeler, in that's just a legitimate way to approach things in the world, etc., and a lens that you view things through, or even the way that you talk about things. I would often say I think, you would often say I feel, right? And those aren't, so first of all, they're not competing, and one is not superior to the other. So then how do you respond to somebody who's being emotional? I think, well, one is validating the emotion. Yeah. And that doesn't, to validate someone's emotions is not to say that everything you are saying and thinking and feeling is correct, but it is to say that what you're feeling is what you're feeling, and that there's nothing wrong with feeling that. Yeah. Right? So I think that's been one thing, is just to make it very clear that I understand that what you're feeling is valid. Hopefully everyone can hear.
Continue on, babe. If you're listening to this and you're not watching, we just realized I never pulled the microphone in, so we'll work on that. It'll be fine.
Yeah, it'll be great. All right. So I think that's one thing. And I think we've had a lot of discussions as to what our needs are in conversation. And so I think that that's what is cool is being married. We have a lot of opportunity for, I don't want to say repeat situations and that it's the same conversations over and over again, but the patterns of conversation are similar in every single one. So it's one of those things where if you're addressing a concern or an issue or what you're feeling, and then I have in some way failed to respond correctly, then I have an opportunity in the near future to kind of practice that. So I think it's been very interesting over our marriage to see how that's already improved really rapidly and our ability to respond to the other. And I don't know that I'm actually answering the question. I hope I am.
I think you're doing a great job. I mean, it's what have you learned about how to respond?
Yeah. And I think so much of that is understanding what you need in conversation, right? Yeah. So as a, for instance, one of your big desires is to be heard and feel like you're being heard.
Correct.
And what leaves you feeling heard is very different than what I would anticipate that is, right? So a lot of our early conversations were a lot of things like, I am hearing and responding to everything you're saying. Therefore, as far as I'm concerned, like I'm showing that I've heard you, right? And that's not actually what you needed.
That wasn't what I needed, and that wasn't what I wanted. And it's what's interesting is I didn't know that wasn't the thing, because you were like, I hear you. I totally, like, I get you. Like, I'm responding to this. And I was like, but why isn't that making me feel heard?
So I think that's it, is that so much of this is individual. And in order for it to work, then you have to be able to communicate what your needs are in conversation and vice versa. And so I think it's a process of working through that. But what I would say is, what works for you doesn't work for me. Correct. In terms of what you need to feel heard and understood and validated, and all of those things are not the same things that I need for those things. Yes. And for anybody out there who is, in a new relationship or getting married or is walking through those early days of marriage, is that your individual needs are going to be different, and they're going to be different than ours. And therefore that's where I say everything is a conversation. Yes. But you're going to have lots of conversations about what your needs in communication are.
Yes. And I think, too, just being really open and being really curious and really wanting to know, like, and kind of talk through the process, like being really vulnerable and being really self-aware of, like, even if that means you're literally processing it and figuring it out with your spouse or the person who's going to be your spouse in real time. Like figuring that out of like, okay, why does this situation make me feel this certain way? Why we also were introduced to the term like a 10-2 reaction of like, when I'm having a level 10 emotional reaction or whatever type of like increased reaction to something that on just factual basis I should probably be having a level 2. Like I probably should be having no reaction to it, or vice versa, right? Where it's, if it's you as well. But like figuring out, okay, like if I'm bringing something up to you and I'm like, okay, this is no big deal, and you're having a level 10 reaction, then I need to take a step and be like, okay, wait a minute. What about the way that I said it, or what I said, or the way that it was received or whatever caused it to raise to a level 10? And that's when it's like, okay, if you really are on the same team, if you really do care about your person, which I hope you do when you're married, then it's like, how can I make it better so that it's not being so triggering for you?
Yeah.
Making you upset.
And I think a key thing there is, if you're having a 10 reaction to a 2 situation, yes, you're touching on something deeper than whatever the 2 situation Correct. Was. So it's identifying and addressing what that larger thing is. Yes. And yeah, sometimes that is communication styles, right? Something we've discovered over time is you're and maybe it's partly leading with feeling, but you're an external processor, largely. And so something I didn't understand, and to be honest, has never been part of my communication style with anybody really, is the need to kind of almost encourage you to process externally by asking questions. Because you're talking about being curious, but that means different things to different people, right? And so for me, I'm a very curious person. But that doesn't mean that if I feel that I have understood what you said and can even communicate that back to you, then I don't need to ask additional questions because I understood what you said. Right. But you don't actually need the questions, as in for somebody to understand what you said. You need the questions to be able to fully process what it is that you're trying to process. And so I think that's where I think knowing yourself and knowing a little bit about your communication style, to your point, though, some of these things I don't think you could have verbalized previously.
No.
So there's things we've stumbled upon. But I think that's the challenge of communicating in marriage and in a relationship is actually understanding what your needs are in communication and being able to communicate them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's also where we've talked a lot about where it's like within our individual like nuclear families, we have for our whole lives been surrounded by people who either communicate the same way or who just sort of we have grown into our beings and our peoplehood, personhood, you know what I mean? Surrounded by those people that understand how we communicate. And so now we, as a couple, are coming into each other's lives, not at square one, and having to learn, okay, wait, I haven't been around you your whole life to understand that this is what you need, and just having these natural rhythms. Like we've talked a lot about how my mom was somebody who communicated very much in the same way to me. And so when she would talk to me about things that I was struggling with or processing or whatever, she just had this natural awareness and understanding that I needed to just be given space to just talk through things and be able to verbally process them. And she was able to do that because that's how she was, but also because she raised me. And even with my dad, who's very much thinks in the way that you think in a lot of things and processes from very different than I do, again, raised me and understands in a lot of ways that that's what I need. And so it's just also then a matter of this new person coming into your life who isn't aware of that and isn't the same way. And you're learning that about each other and wanting to help each other in that way.
Oh, 100%. Right. And I think even with your mom, although I think, and obviously I didn't observe those conversations, but from our conversations, how much of that was she knew you because she'd been with you your whole life versus what she was naturally inclined to do. Who will ever know, right?
Correct.
But the reality is, I think something I've just, contemplated a little bit is that in our everyday conversations with people around us, we may be triggering their communication styles or leaving them feeling unheard or what have you. But because those conversations are much more seldom and spaced out, it may not create issue over time. Or those are maybe people who aren't remaining consistently in your life because there's this communication barrier that neither recognized, but it just created like a separation. Whereas when you're married to somebody, this is the person you're going to be communicating with the most consistently. And there isn't this obvious like, okay, well, our communication isn't working out, so that, we're just going to go our separate ways, right?
Pleasure.
So that you have this vested interest in getting to the bottom of what's creating issues in communication, and I mean that, popped up.
I completely agree. Okay, what is some advice that you wish you received before marriage that you didn't, or that like would have been helpful if you had been like maybe more explicitly told this piece of advice about marriage?
Good question.
Thank you. This was submitted to us via Instagram.
The funny thing is, I think we were actually very well prepared for marriage. I think we did probably more than adequate, premarital counseling.
2 different premarital counseling.
We have a lot of really incredible married couples in our lives who I think all spoken to our marriage in different ways leading up to it. So I don't know that there's any one thing that I can point to that's like, oh gosh, I wish there was that one piece of advice that somebody had given me. I think, it's that funny thing is there are things you just have to learn and go through yourself, and no amount of advice is going to like alter that. So for instance, I think people were giving us advice into not being too committed in the early days of our marriage because they understand that things are just going to take time and you're going to have to when I say fight through things, I don't actually mean argue. I mean, just like it's actually just working through things.
Yes.
And yes, sometimes that's like friction, and that's, you're trying to learn somebody as a whole person, right? In a way that you never had to before, even in dating and engagement and all of these things. It's just different. And so I think that was the advice they were giving is don't overcommit outside of your marriage. And the intention being that it's going to take a lot of time. Everything is going to, you need to like devote the time that is necessary to being married.
Yeah. And because also, especially if you're working full-time jobs and you have friends and you have like things just naturally that you're doing with your life. Like you can't cut off, which I don't think anyone was telling us, like go into a hole for a year.
Yeah.
But people were telling us like, don't, like, just give your marriage space and time.
Yes, and I think a lot of people were saying basically go into a hole for a year,
which I don't think would have worked for us.
May or may not be realistic depending on your situation. Sure. But I think I recognize after the fact that I think that's what that was all about. It's not just like rest and being married is fun and it's this special season. And all of those things are true. But I think what they're actually saying is that I think it's recognition of this fact that everything takes so much time. And so I almost wish that somebody had been a little bit more explicit in the way that they said that, or just be intentional about saying like, look, everything is going to take a lot of time at the beginning and that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. There's nothing wrong with that. I think our marriage counseling kind of prepared us for that.
Yeah.
And I think we'd had some difficult conversations already because of that. Yeah. So like I said, I don't think that there's any one piece of advice. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Like I'm honestly racking my brain trying to think of. I have
one piece of advice that I feel like is that I wish somebody had told me in these words that I feel like goes along really well with this podcast. And that is marriage is a lot of being the bigger person. Because it's like there have been times where we've been in a disagreement or an argument or where there's just things about our day where I'm just like, why isn't he doing that? Or I'm like, why isn't he saying this thing? And it's like, well, maybe Melissa, you just need to be the one that like goes and starts the conversation. Or maybe you're the one that like, okay, he's had a hard day or, you know, he's busy or whatever. Just do the thing. I know it's his responsibility, but just do the thing. Like, you know, and I'm sure we've both felt that where it's like, sometimes it is just being the bigger person. That's not like taking the victim card, you know, where you're not like, oh, well, he should know, or he should be doing this. And it's like, well, no, like sometimes you just need to be the bigger person who gets over your sort of like, you know, and is the bigger person. I think people, talked about this marriage. People talk a lot about marriage being very selfless and you're being sort of like a servant's heart to your spouse. But I think they're sort of in the nitty gritty of it all. It's like, there are days where it's like, I'm like, why isn't he seeing that this is still there? I'm sure you felt that about why isn't she seeing that her clothes are still on the floor? And you know what I mean? And it's like, there are days, okay, it's just, and I think you said in early days of marriage, like we're giving each other a lot of grace.
Yes.
And I think that is there is a unique set of giving grace to each other that maybe is more so in the very early days of marriage.
I don't know.
But I wonder if there's a piece of it where it's like you're just going to constantly be giving each other grace.
Yeah, no. I mean, actually, I think you're right in the direction you were going, but I think that the reason we're quick to give each other such grace is because of the preparation we took going into marriage. Because I actually think that for a lot of people, and I think you probably find this more specifically in secular context, but I think you could find it in any, is that actually people are not giving each other as much grace early in their days of marriage. And that's why there's so much bickering and there's so much fighting in the early days of marriage, because it is wow, why aren't they doing this?
Huh.
We had a lot of conversations where we're very intentional trying to understand whose families did what, you know, in a household. Right. What's our division of responsibilities going to be? So because we did all of that work, then we knew who was supposed to be doing what, and we could extend the grace understanding that we're trying to fall into rhythms and stuff when things weren't happening, right? Whereas if you didn't have any of those conversations, you're just expecting things to be done and they're not being done. And I actually think ours is we're giving each other maybe even too much grace, and it's going to converge on some kind of normal amount of grace. Whereas I think maybe a lot of other people start with too little grace and they have to work their way to an appropriate amount of grace. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and that's what I mean too about like, I think in the beginning phase of marriage for us, it's been like, we're giving each other a lot of grace because we're like, okay, it's newness to like the nth degree, right? Where it's like, we're both living with each other for the first time. We are both married for the first time. We are both like figuring each other out for the first time. This is all very new. And so I think we're giving each other a lot of grace that I think you're right. We'll sort of like even out and level out into sort of the normalness of grace. But I think that sort of the nitty gritty, and it's funny because my mom had mentioned this like years ago with stuff where she was like, sometimes you just have to tell your husband and sometimes you just have to let it go. And I'm like, I like that. Like,
I think
but
something
that is the sort of the being the bigger person
Yeah.
piece of it, where you just can't get offended by like, why isn't he picking his clothes up off the floor? And you're like, Melissa, neither are you. Like,
Yeah, and I think that's another thing is like it's easy to be like you're not actually filling your end of the bargain, but then
Right.
you're like bothered that the other person's not doing doing their side of things. I think something you said earlier though, and I think maybe if we're stumbling on the one piece of advice that I think I wish I had been given, which is that you cannot assume that your spouse is thinking or knows anything.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is not like I'm not talking about adulthood and life and those things, but like if your assumption is like, man, why isn't he saying this thing? Well, it may be because he's not observing the thing that should be causing him to say that thing.
Yeah.
Right? Or like, why hasn't she done this? Pick up clothes, I think is the example that you did, is because this may be her normal and she doesn't think she needs to, right? Like, so like the moment you start putting those assumptions on people, then like you're putting intentions on their actions, right? When in actuality, it may just be something they're completely oblivious to. So I think making assumptions, I think over communicating is the name of the game early days of
I would
marriage.
agree. 1 billion percent.
Yeah.
1 billion percent. Before we go any further, let's talk about something special. In case you didn't know, my brother Josh has Down syndrome, and I'm always, literally always, looking for a way to share about him, about Down syndrome, and about our life as a Down syndrome family with others. Throughout my years as an elementary and special education teacher, I was kind of unfortunately surprised by how few books there were that both taught kids about Down syndrome in a way that was age appropriate and not just a science textbook, with also having an engaging story that featured someone with Down syndrome as the main character. So I decided to fill that gap and write a book of my own, using my master's degree in special education and my 30 plus years as a Down syndrome sister. The ups and downs of a very special superhero shares with kids and really readers of all ages what Down syndrome is, what characteristics people with Down syndrome often possess, what life with someone who has Down syndrome looks like, and how they can be superheroes too through speaking up for what's right. This book will prompt your kids to ask questions and will give you the answers to guide the conversations, and will empower you and your kids to be leaders for change and for kindness in the disability space. Because the more you understand, the better you will be. And what better way to do that than through storytelling that represents more inclusive characters and families? To get a copy for your family, your classroom, or your friends, head to Special Ups and Downs. That's Special UPS and Downs.com, or use the link below in my episode notes. Now, back to our episode. Okay, I'm going to ask one last question about communication and things like that, and then we're going to move into bow, 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 bow.
That was beautiful, babe.
Thank you. This is a kind of funny question, but what is the dumbest thing you thought about since being married?
Dumbest thing we thought about? Ooh.
I'm trying to think of the
Well, yeah, like I will say most of our arguments are pretty deep actually. Yeah. Like they have substance to them. So they're not I don't think they're stupid.
I feel like we thought about a lot of things that were really dumb during dating. And a lot of them fell on semantics, which is why actually in my vows I promised to not get too caught up in disagreements about semantics, because I feel like we would like argue about like, well, the way that I see this is blah, blah, blah. And you like, I would say that and you'd be like, well, no, the wording of the this and that. I'd be like, we're really literally fighting about wording.
Yeah.
Like,
yes. My first one that comes to mind is that you really don't like the idea of a formal dining room. But it wasn't when we were married. I think we were engaged at that time. But you really have you don't mind a dining room. Your issue is the connection of the word, and this is the semantics thing, people. Like this is what we're talking about. She really like the moment you take formal and connect that to dining room, bad thing.
Bad okay, guys, I'm gonna need you to like hit me up. Maybe we'll put this as like I think you can like put like a poll in the whatever the description, or like hit me up on Instagram with this one. But like when I think of like a formal living room or like a formal dining room, I think of something at like your grandparents' house that has like, especially like a formal living room, it has like the plastic over the couches and you're not allowed to sit on the couches and like it's the room that you're not allowed to use. Whereas his perception is that it is a room that is dedicated to one purpose. And that is why like a formal dining room is literally just that room. It's not connected to any other room. It's literally just used for dining. And I was like, no, I think of, and this is, I think, again, we're a feeler and thinker. I think of like it, the vibe and the feeling that comes across with, and he thinks of like, what is the actual thought process behind that word? Anyways, but I would agree. That probably was one of our dumbest. I remember, I think I told one of my girlfriends about it afterwards, and she was like, you guys were literally fighting about that? And I was like, yes, we were. I realize how dumb it sounds. Yeah, I would probably agree. I think that was our dumbest argument. Yeah. So I was going to ask the question, what are the things you most enjoy about marriage that you did not expect? I feel like for me, and I maybe knew that I would expect this, or maybe I knew that I would enjoy this, but I think one of the things I enjoy most is intimacy, sex. It's not bad.
It's great, in fact. Yeah.
It's good.
So there's a reason human beings have been doing it for a long time.
Like correct. And I'm actually, it's interesting. I'm going to be talking about this in 2 episodes from now. But the notion of like the physical pleasure is great, is really beautiful and wonderful, and I highly recommend within marriage. But also the like emotional, mental, spiritual oneness that comes with it. I think that's the one thing I did not expect that I enjoy the most, maybe, is that like closeness and oneness, obviously physically, that we experience in sex and intimacy, but the mental, emotional, spiritual oneness that you like are able to encounter and experience.
I think for me, and I would 100% agree with you on intimacy. And I think to your point, the emotional and spiritual component of that is much more than I thought it would be, which is really incredible. I can't say the physical is dramatically different than I anticipated it would be. So I guess in that way, that one wasn't a big surprise. It's like, it's everything you want it to be kind of thing. I think 2 things that kind of, I guess, surprised me is just how much I would enjoy and value like doing life with my best friend. I knew that it was going to be incredible, but I think it's actually way more than that, right? It's like, this is like, this is the way life is supposed to be. So I think that's one thing. The other one is, and I feel like I need to clarify this statement before I say it, and that is that Melissa and I, when we talked about responsibilities, like early days, getting ready for marriage, one of the things we talked about was cooking, because I know that this is like a big thing, there's like...
No, women are not meant to be in the kitchen, guys, okay? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, generally, right?
Men can cook too.
Men can cook too. And in this case, I'm actually somebody who's a very good cook. A very capable cook. But ironically, I like to do really complex stuff, almost more of your special occasion stuff. And I don't love doing the everyday cooking. I find it very monotonous. And so I was one of those who like meal preps for a week, eats the same thing, 7 days in a row, that guy. Whereas Melissa really loves cooking dinner frequently throughout the week and kind of that style of cooking, more of the everyday stuff. And so that was one of those things where she said that she wanted to do that. And of course, I'm happy if that's not in my best like skill set, like happy to hand that over, right? So something that I did not anticipate, but is so much better than I could have imagined. I didn't realize before I got married how much I thought about what am I doing for dinner tonight. Even if I meal prepped, I'm still thinking about like, when am I doing that? All of this stuff. And to have that offloaded is actually probably the single biggest weight off my shoulders. And it's so dumb to say that, but I don't think about what I'm doing for dinner tonight anymore. And like, to say that that's very freeing is huge. And anyway, I've talked to so many people about this and I feel ridiculous even as I say it. I don't think it's ridiculous. But there's something about that, like not worrying about what's going on for dinner, that is just like phenomenal. So anyway.
Happy to do that. I will also say there is one other thing that I didn't realize until I was talking to somebody about it recently. So I don't know if I've talked about it on the pod. I struggled really intensely with fear for a long time, like fear for my physical safety. a lot of it came back to a news headline that happened when I was a teenager, and it was almost too relatable. And it was a lot about sort of being a girl that was kidnapped out of her bedroom when she was asleep. And I, for a really long time, had that like genuine fear of not being safe at night in my own home. Even though I lived in a very safe neighborhood and all of that. Anyways, as I got to an adulthood, I started to feel a lot more safe, and that fear, God really healed me of that fear and all of that. But I think one of the things about being married, sleeping in the same room as you, knowing that you are very capable, if God forbid somebody were to like bust in the middle of the night or whatever, I have not worried one evening, one night at all about my safety in the house. I've not worried at all about just being in our home, safety. I have had that fear for half my life, and I have not worried about it one bit. So, yeah, that I think I did not quite expect that in marriage, where I was like, oh, this fear that I've had my whole life or half my life, I just wouldn't have anymore. So,
It's awesome.
Thanks for that, Pig.
Absolutely.
All right. You ready for a spicy question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bring them on.
Do you schedule sex or does it kill the vibe?
So I think there's room for both spontaneity and scheduling. I think an approach we took early on, and you see a lot of stuff on social media these days of people giving advice, a lot of it unsolicited, on how to approach intimacy and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I think we landed on a general cadence of wanting to be intimate within every 72 hours or so, right?
Like,
and so
not going more than 3 days without.
Yes. And I think that there's been, not have we done that 100% of the time? No. And there was extenuating circumstances for those things. It's not perfect. It's just a general rule. And I think one of the big things about that was we didn't want it to be this thing where we said, oh, or our goal is to be intimate twice a week. And then, you're intimate 2 days in a row early in the week. And then, okay, now it's a week before you have intimacy again or whatever. And that's why this kind of 3-day rule has been really helpful. But sometimes in order to accomplish that does involve scheduling, right? Because life gets busy and you're, trying to figure out where that's going to fit in. And I think sometimes it just helps break the, wow, is that about to happen? Is this happening? Is this an expectation? Is this happening today? Is it happening? And I think it also promotes conversation, right? Which is sometimes the spontaneous thing is, hey, is this something that's in the cards for you today? And the answer maybe is no, but maybe tomorrow. At which point you kind of inherently scheduled, right?
Yeah.
It's not and maybe you haven't mapped it out to the exact hour and minute that it's going to happen.
5 p.m. on tomorrow.
but it involves scheduling sometimes, right? And I think that's knowing what's going on in your significant other's life, and just trying to figure out what their needs are and where they are, mentally, emotionally, all of those things. I think that's an aspect of it. But I would never leave out spontaneity, because there's all kinds of spontaneous moments, right? And I think men and women's approach or needs prior to intimacy are different. So for instance, for a guy, generally speaking, we can kind of be ready at a moment's notice, right? Whereas women require a certain amount of kind of non-sexual intimacy prior to, initiating that kind of intimacy. And so if you asked prior to doing that, well, do you see that in the cards? The answer might be no, but then with that appropriate stimulation, right, suddenly it's in the cards.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also too, I mean, to just add on to what you said, I think women and men, and I think just people in general, I don't want to put this as to a gendered thing, but I think generally it kind of falls into gendered separation in that. Is that there's sort of these two responses to like desire, which is sometimes it's like you have this desire and so you act on it. And sometimes you're beginning the act of intimacy or sex or whatnot, and then your desire starts to rise. And I think a lot of times what people talk about is that men have this like desire and then they act on it. And a lot of times women, it's like you're in the act or you're beginning it and your desire starts rising. And I think so that's where sometimes scheduling it can be helpful, because even though it's like we're married, I love my husband, of course I desire him. Sometimes it's like, and also just life can catch up with you and it's like, okay, I have to do this thing and I want to go this place and then I'm tired and then I want to watch the show and then whatever. And it's like, oh, now it's 11 p.m. and it's too late, or whatever. And I think that's where sometimes I think I have found that scheduling it, lowercase s, scheduling it, right? Not like, I don't think we've ever put it on our calendar, like, but like that can be helpful where it's like, okay, we're not going to let today end without doing that, because, and then it's like, even if I'm not like, oh yeah, woo, as we begin, then the desire begins to, the level of it starts to rise. We've talked a lot about this notion of, and we've learned a lot about it, especially preparing for marriage, of foreplay. And I think people think of foreplay as like very physical, like acts, which I think, yes, some of that can be more physical, more touch kind of things. But I also think it's just like, I think actually we've talked about this before. Can't remember if I've talked about it on the pod or not, but like this notion of just like, sometimes it's a matter of just being encouraged or being like boosted up. I will never forget, there was one morning and I got up and started going to the bathroom and you were still in bed. And I just remember you were just like, from like the first thing I heard out of you in the morning was just like, you're beautiful. And I was like, well, that's a way to get me going in the morning. So it's like that kind of stuff, or just like holding hands or slapping each other's butts or, whatever, that kind of thing. Yeah. Or honestly, someone said one of the best ways of foreplay is like doing housework, and you're like,
Yeah. And I think this is also one of those situations where knowing somebody's love languages is really helpful, right? Yes. Because if your spouse's acts of service, and I'm going to say this more probably specifically to men about having a wife who's, prefers acts of service, that's like her primary love language, is that doing the dishes may be the thing that turns her on, right? Like, I don't necessarily say in this case that would be you, although I do know that if you feel like you have a laundry list of things to do and you feel like you're not able to check those things off, then that is going to probably preclude intimacy for you, right? Because you're concerned about those things.
Somebody on Instagram said half the people in the world relax so that they can be productive, and the other half are productive so that they can relax, and then those two people marry each other.
Yes. That's us. Yeah. So I think that's one aspect, is like, knowing what allows your spouse to be in a state of rest.
Yep.
And also what are their primary love languages. So in this case, yours being words of affirmation.
Yep.
I kind of tend to fall into that naturally. And then mine being quality time, like that tends to be pretty easy for us, I would say. So, but I think it would be different, not negative, but just different if one of us was acts of service or that sort of thing. Right.
I agree. I'm going to ask a follow-up question, and I'm going to answer it because I think we've experienced this, but, and I want you to answer this as well, but it's kind of a two-part question, which is, how do you express when you're not in the mood? And do you feel rejected / bummed when you're in the mood and your partner is not? And I think we have had conversations about this where there have been times where I, like you said, have like a laundry list of things that I have to do. And I'm like, I have to do the thing and I'm not in the mood and da-da-da. Or honestly, we had a couple weeks recently where I wasn't feeling well. And so it was hard to feel in the mood. Right. And again, I think there's a very big difference. I want to be clear. There's a very big difference between feeling in the mood in that moment versus generally desiring your partner. But I think when you express a lack of a want in that moment to have sex or be intimate, it comes across as if the not being in the mood is a lack of desire. And like, it's like, I think that's something important to note, is that even though you're like, no, I desire you, it comes across as not that you don't desire your person, even if they know you do. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what I have learned, and I'd also love to hear your thoughts, is what I have learned about, it's like, okay, if you're not in the mood for it in that moment or that day or whatnot, not just saying not today, but expressing more of like, and you have said before, and it's very true, like no is a full sentence. You can say no. Right. You don't have to do everything that your partner wants you to do all the time, 100% of the time. But I also think that it's like expressing why not, and giving like I'm just not feeling well, or it's been a long day, or, whatever, I think eases some of the thoughts of why not.
Yeah.
I think that, so being very clear, I think especially for women to men, because as we've seen on reels and all that stuff, like men are like ready at a moment's notice and like will be ready to be with their wives no matter no matter the circumstance. I think women are, like we've talked about, require more foreplay or require just more time, or are not as maybe like immediate in that desire. So I think sometimes giving that reason of like, here's why not, will ease the husband's thought process of like, is it because of this or because of that or whatnot? But I also do think there is, like we talked about earlier, there is an importance in sometimes when you're not like, oh yeah, I'm feeling the real sexy vibes right now. Like sometimes just stepping into that, because 10 out of 10 times I have found, even when I'm not like, oh yeah, sexy music, candles, roses, whatever. But then it's like, okay, but I want to do this because I love my husband. I desire him. And I know that's what I want to do. Then I, 10 out of 10 times, have gotten into the mood as we've gone through it. You know what I mean? So I think that's sort of that balance of, you don't always have to just do the thing, but sometimes pushing yourself a little bit to also serve your husband and love your husband and provide for his needs as well. I think it really matters. And it's not like you're going to, hopefully, obviously there are situations where it's like people have external medical issues or pain, or maybe it's an unhealthy balance within the relationship or whatnot. But I think if you're in a healthy, good, physically healthy, emotionally healthy, all of the relationally healthy relationship, then sometimes just stepping into intimacy and sex, you will also find pleasure as well.
Yeah. It's funny because I mean, the first part of that question is like, I can answer it from one way and not another way, which is like, I'm going to say yet again, this is not universally true, but most guys are not going to not be interested in having sex, right? So if your spouse comes to you and says, are you interested in being intimate? The answer is going to be like, heck yeah. Or like, do you want me to take my shirt off? Right. I think so I think a lot of times.
The answer is not right now on the pod.
Yeah. I think the other side of that, right, is being rejected. So I think as a guy who is going to want to be, I'm going to say, and this isn't, everybody's libidos are different. Everybody's like levels of interest are different, et cetera. So it's not very simple, but I think on the whole, there's a general understanding that men probably have a higher libido or a stronger desire for intimacy than women do in general. Every relationship is different. So there is a high likelihood, it is more likely that the man is going to initiate intimacy and receive a no than it is for a woman to initiate intimacy and to receive a no. Now, I'm not saying that never happens, because I mean, you could have, I don't know, I've never run a marathon, nor do I ever intend to, but I don't know, you could probably run a marathon and, immediately afterwards your spouse is like, hey, are you interested in intimacy? Like, no, I just ran 26 miles. In fact, I want to eat a snack and take a nap. I don't know what that looks like, but so I think there is a situation in the world, right, where there's just physical exhaustion or
sick, or whatever.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys would still try to power through, but I hear you. I hear you. So I think that's a component of it, which means, and then the follow-up question to that is, so do you feel rejected? Do you feel, I think so much of that depends on your emotional intelligence, right? So I think, and also your background and your life experience. I think there are plenty of people who have struggled with rejection throughout their life. And so like every no feels like a rejection, right? The way I've always described it to Melissa is no is a full sentence. So that means like that's always an option. And at the same time, patterns of behavior may result in me feeling rejected. Yeah. So it's probably not any one no, but if I try to initiate intimacy 3 times in a row over the course of several days and you say no each of those times, then I would argue that it would be right for me to feel rejected. right? So, and that's where marriage is about serving each other. And I think that's something very much like Ephesians talks about, right? And it's like this idea that we're both selflessly serving the other. And yes, that means like as a spouse, you may be pursuing intimacy when you're not really feeling in the mood for intimacy because that's the right thing to do for your spouse. Simultaneously, it may mean not pursuing intimacy despite the fact that you feel like you want to be intimate because that's the right way to serve your spouse.
Yeah.
So I think both directions are correct. I think some other interesting things, and that's where I've noticed in our relationship that's very selfless, is you were talking about, an extended period of time of not feeling well, and you volunteered and put out there to meet my physical needs, even if you were not interested or had the capacity to have those same needs met within you, because that wasn't something you had capacity for or what have you, right? And simultaneously, there have been times where I offered to meet your physical needs with no strings attached or expectation of reciprocation, right? And so I think that there's value in that too, where I think generally intimacy is this reciprocal thing, but it doesn't always have to be that way, right? I think something worth noting, and this was not a small, rupture or argument for us, was that for me, I think there was a moment where you kind of felt like it wasn't fair that I even asked or expressed a desire to be intimate. And to be honest, I found that really hurtful at the time. And obviously this is something we worked through and we've talked through a lot and we're on the same page now. But for me, no, I'm not trying to put you in a position to have to say no, but I also don't want to be in a relationship where it would ever be wrong for me to express a desire to be intimate with you, right? But simultaneously, that means you have to have the psychological safety and emotional safety to be able to say no, right? So there's two parts to that. It's not one or the other. And that's one of those things that we've had to be really clear on and and kind of come to an agreement on. But I think it's like that's a very healthy thing too, is there shouldn't be this you can't communicate, right? So like the worst thing you could do is not communicate desire and need, and that goes in both directions.
Key in every aspect of a relationship and a marriage.
So long-winded answer to the question, but that's my answer.
Good answer, babe. One slightly pivoted question, moving away from sex and intimacy for a moment, unless you had anything else to add.
No.
Okay. What have you learned in marriage about being married to someone who is grieving that you didn't know before we were married?
So at the risk of sounding like a broken record, lots of long conversations, right? And I think that's a part of it. I think there is inherently you have a desire to give all of the things that your spouse desires to them, right? And I think like that's, and the one thing that I really wish I could give you is the one thing that I know that I can't, which is I wish I could give you more time with your mom, right? Like, and that's one of those things, like, so recognizing that that's not possible. So I think that's one thing that's been challenging is like, there's nothing that I would love more. And it's like, there's these things where it's like, and we've talked about this, where, I recognize that I should have this relationship with your mom that I don't have the opportunity to have, right? In so many ways that we realized we would have gelled or clicked or, that sort of thing. So I think that's...
Or even just the little things that we've talked about where it's like, we both... Like, I would love to be able to hear and you would love to be able to say, oh, I was talking to my mother-in-law, or like, oh, I saw my in-laws, plural, like that just can't happen.
That's right. And I think that it's recognizing that creates complexity in all kinds of different areas of life, right? When we talk about children, that creates complexity, right? Because it needs to happen that there's ways that we incorporate your mom so that our kids know who your mom was, who your mom is, right? So that's one component, right? Then there are things about like relationships that and not like that in some ways, right? And we've talked about this, that it's like the relationship with my dad is a little bit easier because it's like you gained an additional dad.
Right.
Whereas even though you love my mom, you think she's an incredible person or whatever, how is it not going to make Mother's Day a little more complicated because I can celebrate Mother's Day with my mom, but you don't have the capacity to do the same.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not a negative thing. And it's not that like classic, like in-laws issue kind of thing.
I've been very, very fortunate and very grateful that your parents and your mom, I mean, both of your parents, but we're talking specifically your mom, have just been so kind and so loving in our whole relationship and also in us being married.
Yeah, and thankfully I have emotionally intelligent parents who, my mom even this year was, said something about like, hey, we don't need to celebrate Mother's Day like on the day if that's really hard for Melissa, or like, so there's this understanding that, so even my parents understand that like there are going to be situations made more complex by the grief you've experienced in losing your mother, and that's okay, right? So I think being in an environment where everybody's okay with it, I think that's part of it, right? You would never wish grief on your spouse, but it would also be ignorant and unhelpful to pretend like it doesn't exist.
Correct.
Right? So like accepting that that's part of your reality. It's not the reality you would choose for your spouse, or probably for yourself for that matter.
Right.
But that's going to be a component of the rest of your life, and that's okay. I mean, it's not desirable, but it's okay.
Right. It's what is. And I think you have been very good about it. And I would recommend it for anyone who is married to somebody who has lost a parent or lost somebody really important to them in their life, is like to be okay with the fact that you're not going to just naturally know all the answers, and to ask the questions, to want to know more, it's okay if you feel like you're asking something you should already know, or you're saying something and you're like, I'm not sure if this is 100% helpful. Like, and I think you've been very good about that, and in being like, I'm fully aware that I don't know everything of what you're experiencing, and like, this might be a dumb question, but like, I'm going to ask it because I want to know more. And so I think that's where I would encourage people who are married to somebody who is grieving, is understanding that like, you may not always know all the answers or have all the right things to say. So it's okay if you ask the dumb questions, but also like, don't avoid asking the questions and saying the things. And yeah.
I think also just being a person who's capable of sitting in silence and sitting in grief is okay. Like, there are moments where all you're going to be able to do is sit there and hold your spouse's hand as they cry.
Yes. Which I remember, oh my gosh, I remember the first time I think I've talked about it on the pod. I have this thing that I call the grief cry, which is a very intense cry. It's like the crying version of a panic attack. And I remember we were talking about something one time, and I don't think I'd ever done it in front of you. And I remember being like, babe, I feel like a grief cry coming on, and I'm just going to need you to just be here for a second. Like, you don't need to, just don't say anything and just let it all out. Yeah. But again, having the safety to be able to do that, and having the words to be able to express to you what I needed, and for you to just be comfortable sitting with that and just sort of being there.
And so the other thing is knowing that grief is part of how your spouse or this person that you're supporting is actually interacting with their loved one, right? That's like them interacting with their memory, right? So it's like so there's this beauty of, if all your person has is the memories of this person, because that is, a lot of their legacy. I mean, other than lived out and the people that whose lives they touch, but that grief is this hand-in-hand component of the memory of that person, right? So it's like there's this sadness and there's this darkness to grief, but then there's also that recognition that that's also the joy, and the memory is also the grief, right? So it's a very mixed bag of things, right? The other thing to kind of go back to an earlier conversation, is something I think we both observed, is sometimes some of your 10 reactions to 2-level things have been about grief in your mom's memory, and you didn't know it at the time, or like, and it has created some of our larger arguments. And it's not, you weren't wrong, nor was I. Right. It was just something that was kind of a bit of a blind spot, and you wouldn't have even been able to verbalize that was an issue.
It was caused because of grief. Yeah.
One, when we were dating, this was before we were engaged, we had a conversation about brownies. Yeah. Right. And here I am. So I'm a big baker. And so I found what I do think is the best brownie recipe on the face of the planet.
If you guys want to, hit me up. We'll see if we can get it out there.
And I was saying this, and yes, as a from scratch baker, I do tend to poo poo on, box mixes and things like that. Not because they're not great in a pinch or whatever. It's just that I think the from scratch thing is always going to be superior to something that's out of a box or something of that nature. And so, and Melissa's like getting like angry
because I grew up making the box recipe with my mom.
And well, the with your mom part was not included in this conversation at the time, right? And so it was like, and like she's getting angry, and I'm not understanding. And it's like this is getting into a big thing, and I'm like, to me, it is an objective truth that from scratch brownies are generally better than the box ones. Like this isn't like this is not a debatable thing or an argument. So why is this an issue? And we were able to kind of drill down to the fact that what you were actually was that it was the connection of making box brownies with that you did that with your mom, and your mom was well known for her brownies. That was like
people
something
would come over and we would just make brownies because also my last name, my maiden name was Brown, and so Brown's Brownies the whole night.
And so I think we've gotten to a place now where it's like I think it was more like the value of making brownies with family than it was about it being a box mix, right? And like, but you wouldn't have been able to verbalize that ahead of time, right? And so it's like I think that's where the grace component of not just being this is your spouse and you're going to give them grace because there's all kinds of things, but I think there's an extra level of grace for a grieving spouse because you're going to walk into situations that you didn't know was a tinderbox or you didn't know was a sticking point, and your spouse doesn't know it either. And so that's something we've had to walk through on numerous occasions. But I think it's cool also because once you can get past the emotion of it and like whatever caused the issue in the first place, you now know that you've stumbled upon something that it's important. How do we capture and incorporate that into our family traditions such that there's a moment to remember, right? And it creates legacy. And 100%. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think anyone is getting married to somebody who has lost a parent and is like, I don't know how to support them, hit this guy up because he's been very, very gracious with it, and I'm very grateful. So I basically just sat him in front of my computer sometimes and just showed him like long extended periods of home videos. I'm just like, hey, I just need you to watch these.
Sure.
So anyways, how would you describe marriage in like one sentence?
Oh, well, this is too easy because I've had to do this.
I like tossed you up for this one.
No fewer than a million times, in the time that we've been married so far, because everybody asks you that question.
Everyone's like, how's married life, blah, blah, and I just go like this. I've been how's married life.
It's everything that I hoped it would be and more, and it's challenging. Mm-hmm. Not challenging in a negative way.
And that's where we've said this, like you've said, to 105 people. And I feel like most people are like, oh, yeah, totally. And then some people, I think, get very concerned about and it's challenging part. And you're like, no, that doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah.
It's just marriage is challenging.
It's a lot more conversations that I could have ever anticipated having, right? Like, and yet again, that's not a negative thing. It's not that the conversations are bad. It's not that they're going poorly. It's not anything. It's just that everything's a little... Like, I've avoided using the word hard because I don't think I like the statement marriage is hard. Because I think lots of things in life are hard, and just because something is hard doesn't mean it isn't worth something pursuing. But I think when I describe something as challenging is something to be worked through, to worked on, to be overcome, right? Like we all do challenges in life, have throughout our whole lives. And so I think, and this isn't that marriage is just challenge. I think it is the transitional period of going from singleness to marriage that is hard. And so I think that it would be only natural to really it be challenging, a lot of things to walk through and evaluate when you are going from singleness to being married, because especially if you view marriage as a covenant, and that's why I say within faith in particular, is there is this thing of up until this point, I have not made a decision in my life other than for faith that transcends other decisions in my life, right? So I would have said, so faith was the biggest decision I made in my life. Then the next thing was my career and kind of taking my first really big full-time job. That was the biggest decision I had made in my life. But now I've gotten married. Well, my marriage transcends my career. My marriage transcends everything I've done up to this point in my life, other than the eternal decision of choosing faith, right? So that's when you realize. And then when you choose to have children, well, whereas you choose to be in a relationship with your spouse, and that's a bilateral commitment. When you choose kids, they don't choose to come into the world, right? So you're like, you are pouring yourself into like the raising of it. So that like, and that comes down the road, but it's like, that's where I think they are fundamentally different than all the other decisions we make in life.
I agree.
So
good answer, babe. Ditto. Ditto. That's why whenever people are like, how's married life? And I'm like, maybe you want to take this one?
Yeah, I have thought a lot about how to communicate what marriage is like, because in no way do I want to downplay it, because I think it is so much more than I could have ever imagined in how good it is, right? It's actually more than I would have thought. And it's why I think I understand that this was God's basis of design for humanity, right? The base assumption is marriage, children, those things, right? And then he calls certain people not to do these things, right? He calls some people to singleness. He puts people in a position to not have kids or not have the desire to have kids, like, and that's totally okay. But his basis of design is that we are better. I think it's why, in scripture, it says that man and woman are in marriage are echad, like God is echad, is that God is complete in and of himself. In his three persons, he's complete. And in humanity, we're complete only in being male and female in marriage. And that's really beautiful. It's really beautiful.
I agree.
So, yeah, we're definitely more than the sum of our parts.
Get it, babe. I agree. Well, guys, those were all your questions. Actually, there were some more questions. We might have to do. Maybe we'll do like an Instagram Q&A at some point.
Oh, that'd be fun.
That would be fun. Okay, so stick around again. At Be the Bigger Person Pod. Follow. Do all the things. Thanks for being on, babe. I really appreciate it. It's always a good time. I mean, obviously we chat like this. We don't always sit this close.
No. And then it's kind of like there's almost like a person here, but they're not like, a person. Oh, hey, so I'm trying to be like, oh, hey, y'all out there. But yeah, anyway.
But then also it's weird to like talk to each other through this. And anyways, well, I'm very grateful to have you on. If you guys liked this episode with Ivan, my other half, I was going to say my better half. And in some ways he is my better half. And then people joke that the wife is the better half, but he's my other half and I love him dearly. If you guys liked it, again, screenshot the episode, share it with a friend. Make sure that you are following on either YouTube or your favorite podcast platforms, that it basically takes the guesswork out of when a new episode comes out and you never miss an episode. And again, I've said it 1,000 times, but where should they also follow me? On
Instagram?
Yeah, on Instagram.
Yeah.
At Be the Bigger Person Pod,
yes.
obviously. The Instagram was the part I was setting you
Okay,
up
cool.
for.
I just wanted to,
Yeah.
Whatever things the kids are on these days.
Yeah, although I'm actually not on TikTok, so make sure to follow, subscribe, share the episode, the whole nine, and until next time, I'll see you around.